Waspan is an acronym for Wireless Application Service Providers Association of Nigeria. It's a self-regulated industry group. It's involved in growth and policy advocacy, and it has affiliates in Ghana. We have Waspan, and South Africa, where we have a parent company, the first company that actually started, that we know as Waspan. GSM rolled out in Nigeria in 2001, and ordinarily we will have expected that Wasp companies will also have started. There were a few that actually did start at the time, but we did not have a group of companies providing value-added services ready for the operators and for the industry as at then. However, in 2008, Samson Issa, then CEO of iTouch, that later became Bonjono in Nigeria, and presently who has moved on to be the Director West Africa of Clickatel, did call together a group of some of us who were CEOs of companies at the time. At the time, I was CEO of 3WC. Then we had also Chike Asiodu of Tex Nigeria. He also called, we also had Bukio Yekon of Tavia, Goke Akimboro of Cellulant, and then we also had Rupert Shaw, who presently is the co-founder of Yak Attack. The whole idea basically was, it seems we're having a divide and rule system. Yes, we are competitors, but it's important that we all collaborate for the joint good of the industry and to actually widen the pie and, as it were, the size of the expressway where we all operate. And then we started thinking together about how we can put all these necessary strands together. And I will say that the objectives of Waspan today actually are, first, internal self-regulation, and this is to ensure industry sanity and growth. Second, to provide a proactive interface between the value-added service providers and the mobile networks, as well as an interface with the regulators. And the regulator primarily, in this case for this industry sector, is the NCC, the Nigerian Communications Commission. It's also important to say at this point that Waspan's involvement in interfacing with regulatory bodies goes beyond the primary NCC. Remember, the NCC gave the licenses to the mobile networks, and eventually the NCC licensed, value-added service providers in Nigeria. Beyond that, we also have the NCC, which is the Nigerian Copyright Commission, under which we have COSON, the Copyright Society of Nigeria. So we're involved in advocacy relationships with even the Consumer Protection Council, with the agency in charge of IT development, NIDA, and a few other bodies. And these are part of the advocacy work and policy shaping assignments of Waspan. Another thing that Waspan does is to provide a filter mechanism for the general provision of value-added services in Nigeria. And by this we mean ensuring that things like pornography, things like ethnic bias, religious bias, political bias, and other kinds of content that could spark negative sensitivities are usually filtered. And these don't need to be done by just verbally saying these things are wrong. We actually started putting in place the necessary frameworks, educating ourselves, signing up to this joint understanding that this is the way the industry was going to run. Interestingly, part of our other work is also forging the necessary collaborations internally and locally and internationally to ensure that these vast companies that are starting from Nigeria are actually able to grow. And interestingly, we're glad that quite a number are actually appearing in about 6, 7, even 10 African countries and running profitable operations. Another assignment of Waspan is to help the regulator, actually I like to use the word push the regulator, if you permit me, to take us to a point where we have not just a licensing regime, but a license that actually is given life. Which means if I'm a licensee of the regulator to provide value-added services in Nigeria, I need to be so well known as a best practices company. I need to be bound by the tenets of that agreement as a licensee by the regulator, and more importantly, I need to be able to identify the key benefits that accrue to me and my company by virtue of being licensed. Waspan has had to handle, on behalf of the various members and collectively, as in individually and collectively, a range of issues. Most of these issues have actually been things we could define as misunderstandings between individual WASP and collective WASP and the mobile operators about how certain things should be done. And some of these were really fundamental. Sometimes the issues that Waspan has been with actually the regulators, either response time or opinion about certain issues. And I'll just give a number of examples. For example, there is the challenge of the unilateral change of terms of a commercial agreement. What do we mean by that? So if I'm a value-added service company today, and I go to a mobile network and I say, hey, I have a list of services I want to run, I need short codes from you. They have their own set of parameters by which they judge that I meet the minimum requirements, and then let's say they sign me up. Part of this requirement would be maybe like technical requirements, that I need to have servers that can be able to run certain protocols, and then I connect to them and I have a commercial agreement with them. There comes a time, however, when realistically, because of what is happening in the mobile space, the pressures of a beta and several other things from the board of a mobile network will push its people to start seeking ways to make more money and meet the year's target. And the lower hanging fruit usually is the contractual agreements with these value-added service providers. And so what happens is what I define as a unilateral change of agreement. So you just get a letter or an email or a call saying this is now the set of new terms, and we have redrafted the agreement, or we have done an addendum to the agreement, and you have 48 hours or some other kind of timeline like that to respond and say yes or no. If you say no, we disconnect you. Of course, this is in the worst case scenario, and I'm using that because there are clear examples of firms today that have been disconnected by mobile networks because of this kind of short-term positions on do it our way or no way. Another of the challenges that Waspan has had to deal with has been the unfair handling, in Waspan's estimation, of the transaction logs. So if I'm a value-added service provider and I provide maybe music download services, there obviously has to be a set of logs. If it is a service that the user's request needs to hit the operator and hit the VAS provider's servers, you will have two sets of logs. The operator has its own, and the value-added service provider has its own. Some services that are totally domiciled on the side of the operator, however, makes the operator the sole handler of these logs. And that places a heavy responsibility on you as the operator, because you need to engender trust in the way and timely fashion of your handling and communication of these logs. Unfortunately, not all the networks take this seriously. Sometimes you have situations where for a year, some value-added service providers don't get the necessary logs as at when due from some operators. Another challenge has also been the delay in payments. So quickly, let me build a scenario. When I see an advertisement that you need to text this to get this, at that point when I'm sending the SMS, I'm billed. So I already have a deduction from my airtime balance. For example, I'm paying via airtime usually. And that amount has been held by the mobile network. But that service was created usually by the value-added service provider. Now, at the end of the month, according to the contract, 30-day cycles to redeem, at the end of the month, the operator is supposed to do the necessary calculations and say, based on our contract, here is your money. Unfortunately, I run a company that was owed by one of the networks for about 18 months. It was that bad. 18 months. So if our whole business plan were based on just that mobile network, we'll have been out of business. So what did we do? We actually turned revenue from that mobile network into what we call incidental revenue, money that taps you on the shoulder and says it's here. So we yanked it off our business plan, and we're not expecting money to come in from there. So that didn't make our books look the way it should, but that was the reality. So that's a second challenge. We talked of the unilateral changing of the terms of an agreement. We've talked about the unfair handling and transparency of logs, and now I've talked about the delay in payments. So a fourth is the connotation of a supplanting, and I'm picking my words carefully here, the connotation of a supplanting of local VAS companies with international VAS providers. And I use the word connotation, not denotation, because there is a way you actually do something and communicate another thing. So what has been happening really is, in the early days, 2001, for about a decade after that, you actually had a Nigerian company that had a group of developers and had ideas and services ready to launch some marketing spend, go to a mobile operator and sign up as a VAS provider. Eventually what started to happen is when the mobile network started, when some of them started actually squeezing the screw in terms of the commercials to meet their own targets and for whatever other reasons. When that started happening and there were certain kickbacks from the local guys, there came a point where there were some international heavyweights that looked at Nigeria as just an add-on, let's just expand our footprint. And we will take just anything. If you like, give us a 90 to 10. We will take 10%, you take 90. Just let us come in. And of course, you have these heavyweights that their entry into the country was basically just a little add-on to their revenue, competing with the smaller firms who had 100% attention to this market. And these are people who had to, pay rent, pay for servers, pay for staff, and they were running the necessary bills, best practices, paying taxes, and all of these. And so you can imagine the challenge. So in my estimation, the fourth challenge here is not managing that insinuation well enough. And generally, you ask any vast company in Nigeria whether they have any hope versus the incoming firms just, flooding the country, and many of them will say no. And the reality is, step back like 5 years before now, about half of those international firms that are here were actually interacting with the Nigerian space by contracts they had with local value-added service providers. So that means the local guys had contracts with these international people, and they could filter the services coming from outside and handpicked the ones that will be useful for the Nigerian market. Today, those guys have, skipped that leg, and they are directly into Nigeria, registered as Nigerian companies and doing business. Another challenge that Waspan has also given attention to is the true value, the asking of the question about what really is the true value of a VAS license. And this is a direct question to the regulator. I must say at this point that Waspan's engagement with the regulator has been with the utmost respect, but also with as much objectivity as possible. So yes, thank you very much. You've given us licenses and we're running businesses. Thank you very much. We pay things like the AOL and some other fees that are statutory and that we have signed to in the agreement. But we need to ask you, dear regulator, what is the value that we're going to get from being licensed from you? And that is another thing that Waspan is also engaging the regulator with, to be able to say, this license that we've been given, which we're paying for and which we are responsible to abide by, needs to also give us a list of benefits. We can easily bullet points when woken from sleep and say, these are the clear benefits I get by being a licensee of the NCC. The other thing that Waspan has also been engaged in has been, how do we help to track and filter rogue services? And by rogue services, I mean value-added services designed to exploit. Not that by mistake some of your money gets missing. Services designed to exploit. Some countries around the world, and especially even South Africa, has been very, very helpful in sharing their learnings on these issues. There are some vast companies that come in nice looking into a country, scale all the necessary minimum requirements, get signed up to operators, maybe even get the necessary licensing from regulators, and the aim, they open shop to rob. What do these people, by virtue of their heavy marketing spend, what do they do to the average psyche of the value-added service using public? How do they then see all of us, local and international players in the vast space? They color you the same way. And that is a major problem. Part of the problem also is the aspect of what they call spam, unsolicited messages, which some of you have at one time or the other received. So Waspan is engaging on all of these fronts, trying to ensure that we create the necessary structures and get the necessary listening ears and actually start doing something to be able to solve this problem. So it's not just a talk shop or a bunch of noisemakers. It's basically a group of organized people saying, this is the way forward, test us and let's go. Actually, where do I start describing myself? Maybe I'll tell you about where I started education from. So I went to CMS Grammar School, and I went to University of Lagos, where I read industrial chemistry. But by the time I was rounding off in school, I was already externally focused. I was already working from my fourth year in school. My fourth year in school, I was already doing some work. By the time I was graduating, I had failed at my second business, so I had tried my hands at so many things, from ice cream to all sorts of things. And eventually I found out that I had a penchant more for sales, marketing, and every other thing apart from the original chemistry and chem engine stuff that I did in school. I also found that I had a flair for things that were creative and maybe rather daring in approach to new things, very adventurous. And add that also to the kind of upbringing that I had fantastic parents. I had fantastic parents, and I'm a very objectively religious person. So that probably provides a little background. So zoom out of school. The very first job I got outside school was a fantastic boss who also happened to read exactly what I read in school, and he introduced me to tire sales. So he just opened one big warehouse and said, we have to move this into that market over there. And thus began my foray into sales, and I had fantastic training and mentorship from that very first boss. And then moving on, I went into some other personal businesses by the side, did some work in Ghana, did some work with Breakthrough Africa, with Space Phone, some firms that were into merchandising, some work with P&G, also in Ghana. And by that time, GSM was already being rolled out in Nigeria. So by the time I came back, I was involved with a friend in setting up 3WC, a value-added services firm. Just before then, I'd been involved in some stints of getting an A1 trunk license from Nitel, the defunct PSTN at the time, and so started my foray into mobile value-added services, and that ran for nearly a decade. So by 2010, the central bank released the framework for mobile money and mobile payments generally in Nigeria. And that really caught my attention. I started doing some work then for a UK firm that got licensed in Nigeria, monetized. And eventually I sold off my shares in 3WC around 2012 and started doing two things. First, consulting for the whole industry group, all the other vast firms that decide to work by the tenets of Waspan and thus be best practices companies, be visible enough, and be able to engage the operator and regulator. And also I was also able to start Beyond Branches, a firm with a few other friends, mostly in the UK, some Nigerian, and we've driven it to a point presently where we're engaging with a major switch in Nigeria for an M&A type discussion. Hopefully that should launch maybe January 2015. So that generally summarizes a little about me. Yes, really. I will say that Waspan has achieved some level of success in its original objectives. It's not there yet, and it's an ongoing journey. But there've been some milestones. I will just refer to a few. The fact that today there is a value-added service license is one of the key achievements. Yes, the license is issued by the regulator. That is true. We will not take that from them. But Waspan is glad to say that we engaged to the point of making that industry sector visible enough to be identified as having issues and needing to be licensed. There is also the joint voice that we've been able to create. We've allowed WASPs that are having certain issues and are dying in silence to be able to bring their voices together, have a common forum where these issues are discussed, and we can articulate them constructively to either the operators or the regulator, as the need may be. There have also been the privilege of many WASPs extending even outside Nigeria. So you have regional and international expansion. Some WASP have about operations in about 6 to 10 countries. And I think that is also interesting that we have Nigerian firms actually growing and being virile and looking beyond the shores of their countries. Another main thing I'll see as a plus in the work that's been done so far is that heightened level of responsibility. For you to be a member of Waspan, you have submitted to certain requirements. We're not exactly there yet in terms of the quality we desire to have in our self-regulating mechanism, but if you decide to be a member of Waspan, that means that, hey, you are running best practices to, a great extent as much as possible. You pay taxes. You're a firm that audits its books. You're a firm that generally abides by the rules of engagement of general business within the country and of the tenets of the contracts that you've signed with the various mobile networks. Another success item might also be the number of game-changing petitions that have been raised so far by Waspan. And there have been several position papers that have been submitted, mobile networks, the regulator, ICT minister, and some other bodies have also been contacted by Waspan, helping them see their view of the actual situations on ground. And please note that these various bodies that have been contacted by Waspan, it's not a whistleblowing, hey, there is trouble here kind of thing. It's not a rabble-rousing intent. The intent basically is to inform bodies, individuals, institutions that are impacted or that can impact the vast realm and even the service delivery last mile to the average Nigerian user. So apart from position papers, you also have the 1 week invite that we had for the then chairman of WASPA, that's in South Africa. Like I said, the very first, to the best of our knowledge, the very first WASP association in the African continent. The very first chairman then was Dr. Leon Perlman. He's now in the United States. So at the time we had him invited to Nigeria, and for a whole week he sat with several WASPs, individually, collectively, and we shared thoughts together. He took us through the South African story, the challenges, the early days, and where they were at the time and where they are actually today, which is a much better story, and the engagement of the operator, regulator, WASP in a central filtering unit. And that really caught the interest of the NCC, because we also had him go to Abuja and make a presentation to top directors in the NCC at the time. So I'll say that was also a key milestone. Recently, NCC had, and this was specifically August the 7th, 2014, NCC had at the Lagos Oriental Hotel the maiden, let me see exact words used for it, the maiden Mobile Value Added Service Summit. And Waspan was not only present and made inputs, but also presented a paper alongside the head of technical standards and network integrity of NCC and the head of enforcement and monitoring also of the NCC. So papers were presented, and it was a very, very rich conversation that engendered some hope that quite a number of the issues that have been articulated will be given attention. There's been the redesign of our whole approach to the value-added service space. So rather than Waspan being a noise-making body, yelling every day that there are challenges here, challenges there, we're actually seeking solutions. And so we are redesigning the whole approach, the whole paradigm of saying the mobile operator is the holder of monetary value and is the hosting entity for billing. The mobile operator could actually take a different role in the whole value chain. So we describe the whole value chain left to right. First, you start from the customer, who is the end user. Then you have okay, you could put the customer, who is the end user, on the other side of the spectrum. And so you start from the content provider. Then you have the value-added service provider, or the WASP, that actually can make sense of what a developer cooks, as it were, or sometimes even gives the developer the idea to build an app around a certain idea. So the real owner of the service is a WASP. So you have the WASP, and then when the service is ready, what is the delivery channel of the service, the content itself? You have the mobile networks, and they have several bearers. So there's SMS, there's USSD, there's IVR, and several others. Fine. Then there is the aspect of billing. So if we step back to the traditional days, so when GSM was, the licenses were issued 2001, of course the GSM module that was launched then was 2G essentially, and everybody only paid for digital services by airtime. And in that scenario, the operator is in a position where they could wake up one day and basically say, hey, we've changed the game, you have no choice. So what is essentially happening now is, rather than continuing to bellyache, members of Waspan, and I believe other WASP around the world, are responding to the immediate dictates of the industry we're in, that is actually changing very, very quickly every day. So we're actually finding that there are various other means of billing. It won't happen overnight, and these are being explored, and that is the reality. So it's not something being done in hiding. That is the reality. The operators today can tell you, for example, the impact of OTT on their bottom line. And there are various ways an operator can decide to approach OTT. For example, you could see OTT as the enemy and decide to shut it out entirely. Or you could decide to collaborate with it. And then there are certain forms of synergies. And maybe you create a whole new set of possible services that will benefit the operator, benefit the service provider, and benefit the consumer, who actually wants to see new things and get wowed every day. So today also, there is some form of internal governance in Wasp, and I'm really glad to say that the way we communicate our intent, our objectives, our positions, the way we engage with the operators and the regulators has immensely improved. As I speak, we're redesigning the present website, and once that is up, there will be a press release that indicates, hey, we have a new website, and that process of having the website being improved, having more content, having press releases, having blogs, having a live chat part and things like that, and even a members only section is part of the metamorphosis that I believe, even beyond my involvement with Waspan, will continue to grow.